Hey, my name is Jonathan Leonardo, and today on Internet Church, we'll be talking about God's faithfulness in the presence and in spite of our faithlessness. Just want to give you a warning that today's Internet Church has some serious themes and it has some images that may be upsetting, so a little viewer discretion is advised. And so just want to give you a heads up. We're so thankful that you're here, and this is Internet Church.
My lips are numb.
One of the most important lessons on faith happened nearly a decade ago during a season of intense depression during which I was rushed to the hospital. But first, a little bit of context. I don't know if you remember back when vlogging was the hot thing on YouTube, back when people like Roman Atwood, Emma Chamberlain, Logan Paul, and Liza Koshy were sharing their lives through the internet. For me, my favorite was Casey Neistat. There was just something about his storytelling, his use of technology that just drew me in, and let's just say that I really drank the Kool-Aid. I remember buying the same exact camera as Casey, the same bendy tripod and microphone as Casey, because I wanted to vlog just like Casey. Heck, I even started wearing polarized sunglasses like Casey and eventually bought an electric longboard just like Casey. This is actually how I ended up in the hospital, but we will get there in just a second. So at the time, I was working in Philadelphia at a Bible college teaching classes on discipleship and evangelism. It was our very first year of marriage, and on paper, everything was going great. However, this was actually one of the worst seasons of my life. I'd later find out in counseling that what I was going through was a big season of depression and burnout, which was odd, because if you knew me at the time, this was the last thing that was on my radar. At the time, all I knew was that I felt like I was in a funk, and this funk left me feeling really, really guilty. You see, it had been years since I had faithfully engaged in my spiritual disciplines. I mean, outside of preparing for classes that I was teaching or sermons that I was asked to preach, I was not praying or reading my Bible nearly at all. I was unfaithful. And this was really bad because at the time, that was the only way that I knew how to measure my relationship with God. If I was faithful, then God was going to be faithful back towards me. But if I slacked, then I was doomed. Unfortunately, I was slacking and I felt powerless to change. So one day as I was heading home from class on my Casey Neistat-inspired longboard, something crazy happened. I was taking a left turn onto the street right before my house, and a guy darted across the street in the middle of oncoming traffic about 20 feet in front of me. I thought that he was trying to cross in front of me, so I slowed down and waved him forward. But before I could react, this guy wound up and eventually sucker punched me right in the face. Blood went everywhere. I slammed into the ground and my keys and phone went flying. Now, you're probably wondering what happened. Did I possibly do something to provoke this man to physically assault me? And the answer is no. At the time, there were stories of people falling victim to what they were calling the knockout game, where the game was to see could you knock out a pedestrian in a single punch. Long story short, I ended up in the hospital where they stitched my lip back together. They would x-ray my shoulder, and I eventually found out that I had a torn labrum. A few months later, I would end up in surgery to get that shoulder repaired, and it would require over a year of physical therapy just to get back to that baseline. One would think that this would be a deeply traumatic experience, but oddly enough, it's an experience that I look back on and I actually treasure. It was an experience where I learned how God was faithful to me even when I was, air quotes, unfaithful. Here's why. The moment that I hit the ground and I dislocated my shoulder, everything slowed down just like you see in the movies. In a split second before I could consciously process what was going on, I thought to myself, I hope that they catch this guy. But it wasn't for the reason that you would think. I remember thinking to myself before I even could stand up that I hope that they catch this guy so I can tell him that I forgive him. And this was incredibly surprising to me because as a kid, I was a bit of a hot-tempered kid, angry and prone to violence. And we could just say that forgiveness was not a forte of mine, especially at this season of my life. Around this time, I remember learning about the story of an Amish community who had been brutally attacked by a school shooter. The milk truck driver took the lives of 5 young children in their community. But But in the middle of their grief and sorrow, these Amish people did the unthinkable. Not only did they attend the burial service of that killer, but they ended up hugging the widow and her 3 young children as a sign of their forgiveness. Shortly after, this Amish community would donate money to this family. I remember hearing stories like this and thinking to myself, there is absolutely no way that I would be able to do something like this. But because of my Christian values, this is absolutely something that I aspire to have one day, maybe in the distant future. Now, to be clear, I'm not trying to compare these two experiences because they're miles apart. I'm only trying to illustrate how incapable of forgiveness that I had felt like I was in this season of my life. And yet there I was, reeling in pain in the middle of Stenton Avenue, the victim of assault, and the very first thing on my mind was forgiveness. But how could that be the case? It had been quite some time since I was faithful to God. I wasn't praying or reading my Bible. My heart wasn't even in the ministry that I was doing. And yet, something clearly supernatural had happened in my heart. Here's what I learned. That even in my depression and in my burnout, even in the middle of all of my unfaithfulness, God was faithful to me. He never abandoned me. He never stopped working on me. And He never removed His love from me.
So there are a couple of figures that come to mind that if you really consider their story, they were pretty faithless. One of those is David. Hey, Charlie. And if you think about David, there is a...
Keep going. That's fine.
There's a season in David's life where he is absolutely faithless, at least probably from our human estimation of things. And it's that season where he conspires against Uriah and he has him killed so that the pregnancy that Uriah's wife is experiencing, which is not his child, it's actually David's, can be hidden. And so David commits an atrocious act of violence against a female. He then conspires to murder a loyal friend. And in light of all of this, God continues to be faithful to him, continues to promise that his seed will sit on the throne and that his faithfulness and his covenant won't be removed from him. It's a little uncomfortable. You can think about Paul. Think about who Paul was prior to being called Paul, right? He was a persecutor of the church. And if we read in between the lines, not only did he co-sign murder, which was what happened to Stephen, he was there, but it seems as though he himself partook in some atrocious and violating acts upon those who followed Jesus. Faithless. And yet, God reveals himself to Paul. And in one passage, Paul says something like, God revealed himself in me, right? Revealed his son in me, to me and in me. The faithfulness of God in the presence of faithlessness. And there's certainly others in the scripture that we can think about and go over. But I think probably the person we most want to consider in this moment is the person in the mirror. Like Justin shared with us, there was a season of faithlessness seemingly on his part, and yet God continued to be faithful. And if we are honest, we have those seasons that we can recount in our lives. The challenge is that we're so accustomed to recounting our faithlessness as reason to why God won't do something for us, or as reason as to why we didn't get a certain thing. And the message that Justin shared and what we see in the text is that that's actually the opposite, is that in the moments of our faithlessness, those are the moments where his faithfulness overwhelms and outshines the darkness that we're in, because even in the presence of violence and atrocities and assault and conspiracy to murder and wanting to pursue people down because of what they believed, Jesus manifests the love of God continually and expresses the faithfulness of God towards us in the midst of our faithlessness. And if we do a recounting of our own story and allow the lens to be shifted from our faithlessness to his faithfulness, I promise that you and I, in recounting our story, will see his faithfulness shine bright in the spaces and in the places where we would say we were faithless. So in the time that we have and in our groups, I would encourage y'all, is there a telling or retelling of your story in light of his story that can be shared amongst you? Is there a season of faithlessness that is overwhelmed and overcome by his faithfulness? And maybe there might be those who are in a season that feels like a faithlessness season. Are there those amongst us who might encourage those in light of God's faithfulness, so that even in the midst of what we call our faithlessness, we can tell the goodness of his faithfulness to us? So I leave you with those two things. Can we recount our story in light of his faithfulness? Or is there one among us that might be experiencing faithlessness and who needs to be encouraged according to his faithfulness? I leave those two with you, and I look forward to hearing the takeaways on the other side.